Witam serdecznie i zapraszam do wysłuchania konferencji na temat roli rodzinnego domu Heleny Kowalskiej, przyszłej świętej...
Greetings to all of you. I invite you to listen to this talk about the family of Helena Kowalska, the future Saint Faustina, especially the family's role in shaping Saint Faustina's attitude of trust in God and mercy toward others. We will see that the future mission of Saint Faustina had its beginnings already in her family home. Already in Głogowiec, God began to prepare this little girl, Helena Kowalska, for the great task, the mission of reminding the world of the eternal truth that God is merciful. First point. Why do I mention at the very beginning such broad topics like trust in God and mercy toward others? Just as a bird needs 2 wings in order to fly, so also a man, in order to ascend to God, needs to trust in Him and show mercy to other people. These 2 attitudes, the attitude of trust in God and the attitude of showing mercy toward others, determine whether a person genuinely honors God's mercy. The conditions in which the future Sister Faustina had to live turned out to be a favorable environment for shaping both attitudes. God chose the house of the Kowalski family so that in the heart of this little girl, Helena Kowalska, the future apostle of divine mercy, He can prepare the ground for the development of the mission of the message of mercy. That is the mission that Sister Faustina was to undertake. In this talk, I will try to show how extremely important of the family environment is in the spiritual, moral, and intellectual formation of children. This will not be an academic lecture in pedagogy or psychology. I will just share with you, dear listeners, my personal reflection, my discovery of God's action present already in the early young life of Saint Faustina. A closer look at the childhood of Sister Faustina clearly shows how important are the following: praying together in the family, the parents' example of personal relationship with God, a healthy upbringing of children in the spirit of faithfulness to God's commandments. Second point, the family home as a school of trust in God and mercy toward others. Głogowiec, a village located near the city of Łódź, a village where news from the world arrived late, a village where people worked very hard on the land and the soil was not very fertile at all. It could only produce mainly rye and potatoes. Helenka Kowalska came from Głogowiec. Her family home was made of the cheapest material popular in the area, limestone and clay mortar that quickly crumbled. Its roof was made of straw. Helenka Kowalska's parents managed only 5 hectares of land, of which 2 hectares was a meadow. So it was a miracle to feed 10 children from 3 hectares of land. The father, a carpenter, did not have a permanent job. His earnings came only from part-time jobs. In short, then, the situation at home screamed poverty. Sister Faustina grew up in very poor and harsh conditions. She was poorly dressed, so poorly that 2 of her classmates did not want to sit next to her because of her shabby and damaged clothes. No wonder then that as a 14-year-old, she was eager to work. She wanted to work as a servant because, as she argued, she had the worst dress and there was nothing to wear for Sunday to church, and her father was still working hard and he needed help. Why am I talking about this? Why do I emphasize the poor living conditions of the Kowalski family? To show that trust in God and such an example of life was given to Helenka by her parents, gave both mental and physical strength, not only to live, but also to find meaning in life and joy in these conditions. Despite such poor conditions in the family home, there was always a warm family atmosphere in the Kowalski home. Love, mutual care, and what is extremely important, a creativity in being merciful toward each other. They did not make the miserable conditions in which they lived the center of their lives. They took this difficult reality for what it was and tried to see it with God's eyes. They didn't complain. The fact of being under Russian occupation did not dominate the topics of their family conversations. They put all their hope in God. What's the lesson for us? After all, there is no shortage of worries today. Parents are more and more worried about how they will feed their children, how they will educate them, the uncertainty of tomorrow, a drop in earnings, and very often the lack of a permanent job, and thus a sense of insecurity, are not conducive to building family relationships. However, today, especially in this time of pandemic, isn't it worth taking the example of Sister Faustina's parents? Is the topic of pandemic and insufficient money to become the main topic of conversation in the family? Or is it better, like Mr. and Mrs. Kowalski, to place all your worries and plans, your weakness and desires in God's hands? Trust Him completely. Believe, as we read in the diary of Saint Faustina, that God is really love and mercy itself. If so, then He is the Lord of my life. He is the Lord of my family. He loves and watches over us. He cares for us and wants to bless us. He did not promise that it would be easy, but He assured us that He is with us until the end of this world. And His wounds are an irrefutable proof of His love for us. It is up to you whether you will surrender your worries and put all your hope in God, and if you will share with Him your difficulties. The example of the Kowalski family shows that everyday life with God gives joy, peace of heart, and meaning in life, even in difficult circumstances, and thus contributes to building and developing both marital and parental love. Helenka Kowalska was brought up in such an atmosphere of trust. Looking at the surrounding reality with the eyes of faith, through the eyes of God, she was able to open her heart to the suffering of other people. Already in the very early years of her life, God used these difficult conditions, making Helenka's heart sensitive to the needs of others, and formed within her, in the language of the saintly Pope John Paul II, the creativity of mercy. For example, once as a child, she put on some of her mother's old clothes, and as a beggar she would walk around the countryside from house to house, praying and begging for alms, then taking them to the parish priest for him to give them to the poor. And she also prepared toys made of paper and rags, old materials, for poor children. This attitude of mercy was not only limited to material help given to her home parish. Helenka also showed mercy toward her siblings. Actually, every child in the Kowalski family had their own duties to fulfill. From an early age, the children learned to work. They helped their parents in the fields, looked after their younger siblings, and led the cows to pasture. And like all children, more than once, they neglected their duty or did it clumsily, sometimes with dire consequences. And when caught red-handed, for example when they broke something, they ran away. and Helenka, wanting to defend them, stayed where she was and did not even try to explain herself. So sometimes, although innocent, she was the one punished instead of her brothers or sisters. Generally, Helenka was a sensitive child. It would happen that she would feel sorry for a suffering hen or a dog, so sometimes her young peers would joke about her, "Ah, you pity girl, girl full of pity." Point 3. The Kowalski family was built on God. Despite the difficult conditions of everyday life and the great amount of work, there was always time for prayers in the Kowalski home. God was on the first place in their lives. Therefore, 2 days after the birth of Helenka Kowalska, her parents, Marianna and Stanisław Kowalski, took the baby to the parish of St. Kazimierz in Świnice Warskie to baptize the child, to entrust her to God, and to thank God for this miracle of her birth and this treasure of life entrusted to them. And so on August 27, 1905, the local parish priest then, Father Józef Chodyński, baptized Helena Kowalska. And so it was that this church, for almost half of St. Faustina's short life, was her place of prayer. It is possible that this great desire to become a great saint, which Helenka carried in her heart, arose within her in this church, which today is called the Shrine of the Birth and Baptism of St. Faustina. Also in this church, Helena Kowalska experienced her first deeply significant spiritual experience, first as a child, then as a teenager. It was here that at the age of 7, when praying before the Blessed Sacrament, she felt Jesus' call to a more perfect life, although she had no idea then that there was such a thing as religious life. It was here also that she received her first Holy Communion at the age of 9. Thus, in such conditions conducive to the development of God's grace in her soul, she grew. These conditions were created by her parents, especially her father. And now I would like to very emphatically emphasize the role of the father in the Catholic upbringing of children. Listen, please, all you fathers. Actually, Sister Faustina's father was one of the few in the village, illiteracy was then common, who could read and write. He taught Helenka this art of reading and writing. There were many religious books in the Kowalski home, and since Helenka was a talented and ambitious girl, when shepherding their cows, she would gladly bring a book, read, and easily memorize the stories she read. Because she had a rich imagination, she was able to interestingly tell other children these stories of the lives of the saints. Who knows, these readings certainly made her long for God and made her want to live like the great saints. But let us see the role of the father in this process of Helenka's growing desire for a more holy life. It was her father who taught her to read. It was her father who inspired her to read good books that shape the heart and mind. It was thanks to the fact that her father devoted time to his little daughter that led Helenka to love her dad more and more. She naturally developed a desire to be like her dad, to imitate her dad. She wanted to pray like Daddy. She wanted to love like Daddy. Dad was a model of life for her. Thanks to her dad's attitude, there was formed in the heart of little Helenka the image of God as a father who loves, who wants to spend time with his child, who also requires that a child must be obedient to him. Therefore, when Helena came back too late from having a party as a teenager, and she saw how much she disappointed her father, she felt it in her heart very much. She felt so very sorry for her irresponsible behavior that she made a resolution that, quote, she would never shame her father again. Not only that, she will try to bring fame and comfort to her father. Such a decision also proves the great love of Helena for her father. She felt that her father loved her and continues to love her with a demanding love. That is why she wanted to obey him in order to express her love and gratitude to him. This attitude, developed in the young years of Helena's life, will have a huge impact on the quality of her religious life, on the way she will receive the revelations of a good and loving God. Who would have thought that the father's role in raising a child is so extremely important? And that is not all. In the house of the Kowalski family, there was an altar. In the middle was a crucifix, and on both sides were little statues of the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Her father bought this while on a pilgrimage to Częstochowa. In the evenings, parents and children gathered around this altar to pray together. Such common prayer strengthened their mutual bonds. Parents became more and more models, examples of how to live, how to believe. The mornings were also marked with prayer. Early in the morning, Mr. Stanisław sang aloud the little hours of the Immaculate Conception of the Blessed Virgin Mary. He also sang a song praising God for another day of life, entitled, When the Morning Dawn Rises. During Lent, he sang the Lamentations, poetry and song about the Passion of Christ, a popular devotion practiced until today in churches in Poland. Helenka Kowalska learned that time belonged to God, and the next day of life is a grace, and that it is worth entrusting your day to God in the morning and giving thanks in the evening. Probably in Helena, there was a growing belief that if Dad prays, God really exists. Since Dad starts the morning with God, it means that God is really important, that He is worth loving and devoting our time to Him. Helena also had the opportunity to find out that her father not only prays, but lives according to God's commandments. Once, when her brother tore twigs from the neighbor's birch tree, Dad punished her brother severely. God's commandments are sacred, and the Decalogue is to be obeyed. Thus Helenka learned that the life of faith must be confirmed by deeds. In the future, she would understand that trust in God is precisely the fulfillment of God's will, expressed in God's commandments and in the duties of one's state. Helena's parents performed their duties very conscientiously. Both her father and mother were hard-working people. This way of honestly undertaking work, respect for someone else's property, life of prayer, all this flowed from a living faith in God. According to Father Franciszek Jabłoński, then the parish priest in 1937, the Kowalski family were, quote, very average Catholics. They did not distinguish themselves from the rest of the parishioners, and yet, as Sister Faustina recalls in her diary, when she relates her meeting with her parents in February of 1936, it was her father's prayer, the example of healthy piety given to her by her parents, that touched the saint's heart. Quote, After they welcomed me, all of us went down on our knees to thank God for the grace of being able to see each other once more in this life. When I saw my father praying, I felt very ashamed that after so many years in the congregation, I did not know how to pray so sincerely or so fervently, and so I give constant thanks to God for giving me such parents. Close quote. From what she wrote, let us note the very fact that immediately after the initial greeting, everyone fell on their knees and began to thank God for being able to see each other. This shows that in Helena's parents there is an attitude full of humility and gratitude. They were well aware that they owed everything to God. This attitude of humility and gratitude stems from trust in God, that is, a living faith that everything is grace. Yes, that's right. Everything is grace. God has chosen the place where each of us is born. The conditions in which we live can serve as an opportunity for personal development, a deeper knowledge of God, and authentic trust in Him. However, the example of how parents live their life is extremely important. Parents have a great responsibility before God. And here I would especially like to address you, dear parents. God is counting on you. God entrusts children to you. Who knows if to one of your children God will want to entrust some important task or mission to be fulfilled. But the question is whether through the witness of your own life you actually show your children the true image of God as a merciful Father who is worthy of trust. Sister Faustina did not have ideal living conditions or perfect parents. However, she loved them because they gave her God. They showed her the meaning of life. Even in difficult, harsh living conditions, there is always an opportunity to grow in trust in God and showing mercy toward others. Therefore, let us often repeat in our everyday life, the way our life is now, the words of the prayer taught to us by Sister Faustina. Jesus, I trust in you.